I want to talk quickly, though, about this Russia oil price cap because I haven't reacted to this yet, and it's been a conversation in the works for a while. It's another step in these sanctions because, as you know, the sanctions on Russia have not been so effective. Russia's currency is doing better, right? The ruble is doing better than it had been maybe at any point. Russia has been able to negotiate with other countries, has been able to continue third-party sales of its oil and gas. It has been able to raise the price because inflation has been through the roof, and there's been price gouging and all of that anyway. But Russia has been able to raise the price of its oil because it's become more valuable. The more sanctioned it becomes, the more desperate the world becomes for this energy, because now there's a lot of fear among especially Western countries of going against these sanctions that they've put on Russia. The very, 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 perhaps there's no better example of the EU and the West shooting itself in the foot than these sanctions on Russia. And we've covered that here many times because it's really worth repeating. And this situation is not improving, right? This situation is not improving despite all of you see the Biden administration's Twitter, right? Joe Biden's Twitter, he'll say things are getting better, gas prices are lowering, all of this stuff. Well, the United States has sacrificed the EU at the altar of these sanctions and has artificially boosted its dollar on the backs of the European Union. And so it has made the EU more dependent on U.S. energy supplies. So, of course, there might be some relief that the United States feels temporarily, but the relief isn't coming to Europe, and Europe is on its way toward, really already in, an economic crisis. And some could argue the United States is kind of whistling past its own economic crisis right now. But nonetheless, there is, mainstream economists are talking about how negative this $60 per barrel of oil is, this oil price cap is for the world economy. It is very disruptive, and mainstream economists are talking about how this Western price cap is disrupting the global oil markets already. And where this has just been announced, I think this was just applied not a week ago. There have been a lot of deliberations about it, but it's not going well already, and it's already causing disruptions. And so an energy economist says, Demosthenes Floros says that the latest EU sanctions on Russian oil exports will fail to strip the country of its revenues, but are already causing global oil supply chain disruptions, says Europa Riccieri, actually, a senior energy economist at CER Central Europa. So the EU embargo took effect on Monday and was accompanied by a $60 price cap on Russian crude, supported by G7 countries and Australia. Any transactions over this limit are now barred from receiving brokerage, shipping, or insurance services. Demosthenes Floros said that although the price cap has not sparked an immediate surge in oil prices, severe consequences lie ahead. The economist predicts rising demand in China, which inevitably will affect the cost of crude. He added that higher energy prices will deal a blow to the EU at a time of spiraling inflation and unfolding recession. He explained that 43% of EU inflation is related to energy prices, while only 17% of US inflation is due to energy prices, and this is a very big difference between the EU and the US, adding that the price cap will deepen the split within the bloc. The sanctions may also result in serious problems with contracting necessary volumes of diesel in the EU once the ban on Russian refined oil products comes into force on February 5th, he warned. Quote, I think that prices will increase because if other OPEC plus producers will not compensate Russian output, the economist said, cautioning that politicization of energy supplies could further destabilize a market which has not yet recovered from the COVID crisis. EU oil sanctions on Russia are already causing setbacks. Dozens of tankers carrying 23 million barrels of crude are currently stuck in the Bosporus and Dardanelles Strait, unable to pass as Turkish authorities demand proper insurance guarantees. Most of the Black Sea crude stuck in the straits was from Kazakhstan, which is not targeted by sanctions, according to EU officials. At the same time, Russian insurance companies have already provided letters of confirmation to Turkish authorities in order to secure passage. So there's already all sorts of confusion. There's all sorts of disruptions. But the point is here is that Europe is not going to really benefit from this. Europe is only going to see its own problems get worse. And this is what it means to be a real vassal. I mean, I never thought I would see the day where Saudi Arabia would be taking a more sovereign, independent, and self determined position on politics than Europe. Now, of course, Europe is, imperialist, does not have necessarily independence from its economic shackles, but at the same time, even now you see, Macron and these folks try to act like they have some kind of independence, at least diplomatically, around some of these issues. But economically, they're all just signing off on anything that the United States wants economically and militarily. Even now, as Biden talks about the possibility of peace in Ukraine, and Macron talks about how he's ready to talk to Putin about Russia's security guarantees, you have EU foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell. Remember the jungle guy? This guy's supposedly a socialist. You know what he's saying? He's saying that while he's for peace in Ukraine, we need to give them more weapons over and over and over again. We need to increase our foreign policy expenditures, our military expenditures higher than what they are now, despite the fact that they've increased astronomically. I think they spend somewhere 300 billion euros, the EU does, on militarism. And now he wants more. And this is someone who considers himself a socialist. This is the same guy that's talking about how basically the global south, Russia, China, all these countries are a jungle that needs to be conquered, speaking the white man's burden. Now he's talking about how great it is that the EU is spending so much money on militarism and on military expenditure. It's absolutely just, mind-boggling, but it just shows how deeply social democrats, you have the Democratic Party here, you have the social democrats in Europe, how deeply invested they have become in imperialism. And that's why we have a lot of this confusion, right? All over Twitter and social media. And just in general, I think people are like, well, I thought the left was the anti-war force. Well, a lot of the left has become the right, has become obsessed with neocon objectives. And it just shows that they were never really left. They were not on the left. Social democrats capitulate to imperialism every single time. This is a historical fact. A real left, a true left. That's what I try to position here on this channel, which is why I don't even always have just we're too small right now. And so we need to be able to navigate and engage with people who don't necessarily consider themselves the left, but we can agree with on very key issues, especially on foreign policy in the world. But a lot of this so-called left is just pro-imperialism. They don't even talk about how devastating this oil price cap is, these sanctions on Russia are overall. They don't talk about it. They think it's it's great that it's a lesser form of war. That's not what sanctions are. Sanctions are not a lesser form of war. And now the EU, the United States have gone too far. They've gone too far with the sanctions. Now it's having ripple effects across the entire economy. You know, what they did with Venezuela and Cuba and Syria and countries like that, they thought they could do to Russia, and they can't. They can't cripple Russia the same way they could cripple those countries, even though a lot of those countries still have found a way to get by, at least in terms of just maintaining political integrity and stability. But nonetheless, their economies have been devastated by sanctions. But Russia is a different country. Russia's a rising power, right? It's not a small, underdeveloped country. It's not a super exploited country. It's one that has the capacity to navigate differently, to engage with the world economy differently. And that's exactly what it's done. And now the EU and the US are so desperate to try to impose these price caps, these energy caps, trying to impose this, this just disastrous economic policy on Russia. But really all it's doing is it's disintegrating the European Union and making the European Union just that much weaker, that much more dependent on the United States. But you know what? That was always the plan. And this has always been the plan. The United States never wanted to respect the European Union as an independent entity. It always wanted the European Union to open up deeper and deeper to austerity and open up deeper and deeper into NATO imperialist warfare. And that's what it is accelerating right now. It is seeing a great opportunity to shove its fracked gas, to shove its so-called energy independence on top of Europe in order to destroy whatever is left of Europe's industrial and public sector. That's what it wants to do. It wants Europe to become a haven for finance capital. And finance capital is frothing at the mouth at this. That's why Wall Street and Downing Street, like these forces, they never question the arms sales. They want the arms sales to continue. They don't ask for peace. They don't do any of that, right? You will have, even on Financial Times and forums like that, you would have in certain areas questions about this U.S. foreign policy objectives and trajectories and policies. Not on this one, because this is a cash cow. This is a huge money grab, and Europe is being treated. Brian Berletic said it here on this channel. I agree with that. Europe is being treated economically, at least. They'll never do this politically, socially. They'll never say Europe is some kind of colony, but economically, they are trying to turn Europe into an underdeveloped, dependent vassal state that basically siphons all of its industry, all of its economic activity into U.S. coffers, into U.S. monopolies, into the U.S.'s predatory finance capitalist regime. And that is why the neoconservatives are so prominent here. That's why they're in the vanguard, because neocons are nothing but the appendage of finance capital as a political class, as a militarist class. The neocons serve finance capital. They serve the banks. They serve Wall Street. They serve the financiers who want to strip Europe of everything, but they want to strip the world of everything. That's why people have issues with World Economic Forum. I wish people would talk about it more like this, that the WEF is more about finance capital, and that's why they say things like own nothing and be happy. Well, it's because they want finance capital to own everything. That's the principal contradiction here. Not that there's some kind of like, I don't even know what people are saying really about the World Economic Forum. Like Klaus Schwab is some kind of all omnipotent person, omnipowerful person. It's just ridiculous. This is just a front for finance capital, just like most political NGO efforts on the part of finance. This is all just a front. It's all about trying to reset public relations. A great reset is just resetting public relations. And so finance capital doesn't really have to be challenged. It doesn't have to be, because it's just constantly accumulating off of the backs of the majority of the world's people. And it's not until we can make that connection between U.S. Capital, finance capital, Western finance capital, and the condition of the people, right? The condition of workers in the US, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, until we can make these connections, understand the contradictions, because it's not all the same. It's not all the same treatment. It's not all the same conditions. But once we can make those links, then we can actually have an anti-war movement. We can actually have a peace movement. We can actually have a class war, right? A real class war with these hegemonists, with these monopolists, with these finance capitalists, right? That's the only way forward. And we have to understand issues like this oil price cap as class warfare, as a global class war targeting Russia primarily, but really undermining the conditions of workers everywhere. That is just fact, and that is the position, that is the understanding we need to have in order to move things forward in a positive direction, to move people in a positive direction, to understand that Russia is not their enemy. It's not Russia. It's not China. It's these big monopolies and corporations and financiers who are looking at war as just another profitable venture, and damn the consequences, right? Who cares? Because they don't feel it, and they won't feel it. They'll never feel it. It's too big to fail. People like Elon Musk, people like Jeff Bezos, people that sit on the stock exchange, right? They are too big to fail in their opinion. They don't, whenever there's an economic crisis, they know the Federal Reserve, they know that there's going to be huge bailouts coming from the governments involved. They don't have to worry. So they just sit and watch as they rake in massive profits from this dangerous war. And that's what these economic sanctions are about, despite the consequences. The economic crisis is basically already here, and it's only going to get worse. But they're thinking, well, we can shove our crude, our fracked gas on Europe. We can deindustrialize. We can siphon. We can take and take and take. And once it's all over, we'll be richer. They'll be poorer. And that's the name of the game. And that is beneficial. That's what they want.